Dead America. The Waitress by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Lexington, Kentucky. 4:13 a.m., the morning of day 0. Nora stood patiently beside the small window that separated the kitchen from the dining room, waiting on the next order to be served up. Despite the early morning hour, the restaurant was busier than normal. Nora stretched a bit as she waited. The years of being on her feet were beginning to take their toll on her 42-year-old body. While there were a lot of drawbacks to a career in food service, such as pay, respect, and the seemingly never-ending late nights, there were some decent benefits. The constant activity did wonders for keeping her in shape, as every shift was a cardio workout. Having a flexible schedule helped out when it came to caring for her 2 children. However, the only benefit she had on her mind was her free shift meal, which had eluded her thanks to the unexpected rush. "Hey Nora, we're just waiting on fries." "Should only be another minute or so," Andrew called out. Nora looked back through the narrow opening, spotting her coworker Andrew. Despite only being 32, the man looked like he was easily older than the waitress. While she had never pressed him on why he looked so rough, she had her suspicions based on some of the wild stories he shared with the other cooks. "No worries, Andrew. I don't think my people are in that big of a hurry," she replied. Nora motioned over her shoulder to the booth in the corner, where 2 20-somethings sat. Kyle was a scrawny kid in jeans and a black hoodie, with hair to match. His date Rachel was the polar opposite of him, fit, blonde, and far more attractive. Despite the appearance of a mismatch, the 2 of them held hands in the middle of the table while they talked. Andrew let out a chuckle, shaking his head while putting one of the dishes in the window. If I had to venture a guess, he's dealing something she wants. Nora looked at the cook incredulously, stunned into momentary silence. Finally, she snapped out of her stupor. "Wow, Andrew, I always thought you were a cynic, but I had no idea you were that big of a cynic." Andrew shrugged his shoulders. "What can I say? I call them like I see them. I know they look like opposites, but why in the world would you think that the only reason she's with him is because of the drugs he's dealing? He could have a wonderful personality." Nora countered. Andrew chuckled, reaching into his back pocket and pulling out his wallet. He fumbled around with it for a moment before pulling out a small photo and tossing it into the window for her to see. Nora picked it up, immediately seeing a much younger-looking yet still quite grungy Andrew with his arm wrapped around a stunning brunette. "I assume that's you, but I don't know what I'm looking at," she said. "Back in my college days, I used to sling a little stuff on the side. It just so happens that the girl there really liked the stuff, which meant she really liked me," Andrew explained. "Damn, Andrew, and I thought I had self-confidence issues," Nora remarked. "Don't get me wrong, Nora. I have self-confidence. I also have enough common sense to know that there's no way a woman that hot is going to be interested in a guy like me because of my personality," he replied. Nora thought about it for a moment before holding the picture up in front of him. "So I take it you 2 are still together then?" "Oh, hell no. She dumped me the minute I got out of the game," Andrew replied. Nora stared at the cook for a moment, baffled. "So if you're not together, then why are you carrying around a picture of her?" "Unless I hit the lottery jackpot, that's going to be the hottest woman who ever shows any interest in me," Andrew said. "And you really want to hang on to that?" she asked. "Hey, if you hit the lottery and spent all the money, wouldn't you want to remember hitting it in the first place?" Andrew countered. Nora thought about it for a moment before ultimately nodding her head in agreement. A few seconds later, Andrew grabbed a handful of fresh fries out of the basket and tossed them onto a plate. With a ring of the bell, he let out a smile. "Order up," he announced. Nora let out a sigh as she grabbed both plates and carried them across the restaurant. While walking, she glanced over at the other 3 tables with people at them. A lone man fiddled on his phone as he downed the last of his soda, while an older man held up his coffee cup to show that it was empty. "I see you, Corbin. Let me drop this off and I'll be right back," Nora called out. "Take your time, Nora. I don't have to be on shift for another 40 minutes, Corbin replied. Nora nodded at her regular before arriving at the corner booth. She set the plates down on the table, staring at them for a moment before realizing she had the placements mixed up. With a chuckle to herself, she slid them around so that the right meals were in front of the correct people. Here you two go. Just be careful because those fries are fresh out of the fryer, so they're hot as hell, Nora said. Rachel simply smiled at Nora before grabbing one of the fries and popping it into her mouth. Despite the intense heat, she didn't react at all. I appreciate the heads up, but scalding hot food is no big deal, Rachel said. Yeah, my girl here works in the kitchen down at Antonio's, Kyle chimed in, beaming with pride. Nora looked at the young woman intently, wondering to herself how someone so young could cook at such a high-end place. Antonio's, really? That's incredible. Didn't they win Best in Lexington this year? She asked. We finished second behind one of those famous TV chef restaurants, Rachel admitted. Yeah, it was a total robbery. The only reason the paper gave the award to that place is because the chef promised to do a sit-down interview with them if their place won. Everybody in town knows they were the real winner, Kyle added. I say let the stuffed shirts have their award. Real people know where the good stuff is, Nora said. Have you ever been there? Kyle asked. Nora laughed a bit before responding. On what I make working here? I'm pretty sure it would take a full shift to afford an appetizer, she said. You know, they're always looking for experienced waitstaff there. You should go talk to Antonio. He's a good guy. In fact, tell them I sent you, and I'm sure he'll give you a shot. My name's Rachel, by the way, Rachel said. And I'm her lesser half, Kyle quipped. Rachel rolled her eyes before throwing a French fry in his direction. Please ignore him. He's an idiot. A lovable idiot, but an idiot nonetheless, she said. Thank you, Rachel, but why would you put in a good word for a total stranger? Nora asked. You got our order right, and you're attentive to your tables. Right off the bat, you're better than half our current staff at the moment, Rachel replied. A few tables away, Corbin playfully cleared his throat before holding up his cup of coffee. A second later, he turned around and gave the others a wink, letting them know he was just joking around. Thank you for your vote of confidence, Corbin. I'll be right over. As for the two of you, can I get you anything else right now? Nora asked. I think we're good, Nora. Go handle your problem customer, Rachel said with a laugh. Rachel laughed as Nora made her way back behind the counter towards the coffee pot. Her attention was drawn to the other table near the front door when the customer let out a half whistle. I'm sorry, I have to run. 30 should cover everything and leave something left over for you. Can I just leave it here on the table? The customer asked. That's very generous of you, sir. Thank you, and have a great rest of your night, or morning, Nora replied. Sadly, it's a little bit of both. Gotta love those double shifts, the customer said. Tell me about it. Good luck out there, Nora said. The customer tossed the money on the table before heading for the door. Nora turned to make her way over to Corbin with the coffee pot in hand, chuckling to herself as she saw him playfully moving the empty cup around in the air. Even though I love you like a brother, Corbin, I will smack the shit out of you, like you were my other brother, Nora said. Are you talking about the one who put that fart noisemaker in your backpack on the first day of high school? Corbin asked. Yep, that's him, Nora replied. Corbin immediately put the coffee cup down, getting a sheepish grin on his face. Okay, I'll be good, he said. You're a wise man, Corbin. Unlike my brother, who still walks with a bit of a limp, Nora said. Kyle and Rachel tuned into the conversation, pausing their meals to interject. Damn, Nora, you gave your brother a permanent injury for a prank, Kyle asked. Well, Kyle, that noisemaker went off during homeroom. Did I mention that the volume was turned up to 11? Nora replied. Your brother's lucky you let him keep the leg, Rachel said. It wasn't for lack of trying on my part. So many bad nicknames followed me around for all 4 years of high school thanks to him, Nora said. Nora paused for a moment, going into deep thought before continuing. You know, just because I'm having flashbacks, I think I'm going to get him the next time I see him. You could always give him a matching limp on the other leg, Rachel suggested. I could, but it feels lazy. I don't like repeating myself, Nora replied. You could send him a Christmas card filled with glitter, Kyle said. Okay, let's calm down there a bit, Satan. I want to prank him, not scar him for life. Well, scar him for life again, Nora said. The couple and waitress laughed it up for a moment before something just outside the window caught Nora's eye. The customer who had left moments earlier stood by the driver's side door of his car, fumbling around with his keys, completely unaware of a man sprinting towards him from the darkness. Damn it, those thieves are back, Nora said. Nora leaned over Corbin, smacking her hand on the glass as hard as she could, yelling at the top of her lungs in the hopes that the customer would hear her. Look to your right. Look to your right. Nora continued pounding on the glass, watching helplessly as the customer didn't react to her warning. He managed to get the door to his car open before the sprinting man tackled him. The customer's head bounced off the top edge of the open door, sending a spurt of blood flying onto the hood of the car. His body fell lifeless as the rampaging man enveloped him. Andrew, I need the bat, Nora shouted. Without missing a beat, Nora turned and rushed over to the front door of the restaurant. She paused at the entrance for a moment, waiting for Andrew to emerge from the kitchen. The cook threw open the two-way door, brandishing a wooden baseball bat. He tossed it towards the waitress, who snagged it out of the air and quickly got it into fighting position. This will only take a second, Nora said. Rachel motioned to Kyle to go help the waitress. Reluctantly, he pulled himself up from his seat and made his way to the front door as it closed behind Nora, who was already heading out into the parking lot. Nora strolled across the lot, stopping a few yards away from the would-be thief and victim, both of whom were collapsed on the ground beside the car. The waitress smacked her bat onto the pavement for effect. I told you assholes last week to stop trying to rob my customers. Now I'm going to have to beat that threat into you, Nora said. The robber continued moving on top of the customer for several seconds before noticing Nora standing behind him. With jerky movements, he sat up and spun his head around, revealing the truth of the situation. Oh my God, Nora whispered. The would-be robber had a vacant expression on his face, which was overshadowed by the hunk of customer flesh in its mouth. With a fierce moan that bordered on a growl, it scrambled to its feet, now in pursuit of fresh prey. Chapter 2. The robber-turned bloodthirsty creature leapt to its feet, moaning in excitement as it rushed towards Nora. While the waitress was shocked at the sight, she was unflappable in the face of danger, quickly bringing the bat to her shoulder. As the ghoul got within striking distance, Nora stepped slightly forward and swung with everything she could muster. The barrel of the bat landed squarely on the shoulder of the creature with enough force to knock it off balance. The zombie fell to the ground, landing hard on its side on the unforgiving pavement. Despite the audible crack of bones, the ghoul didn't cry out in pain, nor show any signs of distress. The only indication it was injured at all was the forearm of the ghoul giving way as it pushed against it to pull itself up, the break from the fall rendering the limb all but useless. What the hell? Nora exclaimed, raising the bat back up above her head. However, before she could deliver another strike, Kyle grabbed her by the arm and yanked her back towards the restaurant. Come on, we have to move, Kyle urged. Nora's eyes flashed red with rage, which quickly dissipated when she heard the sound of multiple footsteps in the distance. She glanced back towards the road, spotting 3 more creatures rushing towards them. Kyle pulled on her arm one more time, finally getting her to move. The two of them raced towards the front door of the restaurant, where Corbin and Rachel stood by, waiting to secure it once they were safely inside. Get inside, Rachel shouted. Kyle outpaced the waitress by a couple of steps, darting through the open door with ease. His momentum carried him to the counter, resulting in him nearly toppling over it. Andrew grabbed onto his arm before he flipped completely and hit the floor. I got you, man. I got you, Andrew said, lifting Kyle up and gently pushing him back so that the young man's feet touched the ground softly. Before he could exchange a thank you with the cook, panicked screams from the front door resonated through the diner. Both men turned their attention to the entrance, watching Nora tumble to the ground. Rachel and Corbin struggled to shove the door closed as the zombie from the parking lot managed to wedge itself in the opening. We need some help here, Corbin called out. Kyle rushed over to the door, leaping over Nora, who was trying to regain her bearings after a hard fall. Andrew, however, turned and ran into the kitchen, vanishing behind the swinging door. Kyle reached his hands out towards the ghoul trapped in the doorway, trying to deflect its flailing arms. The ghoul thrashed about, desperate to grab a hold of anyone within range. Despite his best effort, the creature's flailing arms were too much to contain. They flung around violently, catching Rachel in the face with a backhanded slap. The impact shocked her just enough to make her back away from the door for a brief second, allowing the creature to inch further into the restaurant. Nora finally pulled herself up, quickly spotting the situation at the front door. Rather than rush to help, her attention was drawn to the parking lot, where two of the zombies that had been rushing them were closing in on the door. "We have to close that door," Nora yelled. "We're trying, Nora, but he won't budge," Corbin responded. Nora looked down at her bat, realizing in an instant that it wouldn't be effective enough against whatever that thing was in the door. If the fall onto the pavement wasn't enough to cause it pain, any swing she could muster up wouldn't cause it to retreat. "Pull it inside," she instructed. Nora continued yelling out as she hopped to her feet and raced to the door. She reached out, managing to grab onto the creature's arm on the first try. Kyle looked at her with confusion as she pulled on the ghoul, but with one brief look outside towards the incoming creatures, it didn't take him long to figure out Nora's motivation. "Let up on the door," Kyle ordered. Corbin and Rachel didn't object, they just listened and obeyed. Both customers took half a step back, relieving the pressure on the creature and allowing the others to pull it inside the restaurant. As soon as the ghoul was clear of the threshold, they slammed the door shut, securing the lock just before the first outside creature reached it. The ghoul outside smacked its hands against the door in a futile attempt to get it open, but it did not budge. Kyle and Nora, meanwhile, were struggling to contain the thrashing zombie. With a swing of its broken arm, the creature caught Kyle right on the bridge of his nose with enough force to snap it in two. The young customer's head snapped back from the blow, sending him tumbling to the ground. "Nora," Corbin shouted, rushing to the aid of his waitress friend as she struggled alone against the creature. He grabbed onto the ghoul's shoulders, pulling it backward as its teeth got uncomfortably close to her neck. The sudden pull by the customer was successful in preventing Nora from being bitten. However, it gave the zombie another target. The creature spun around to the side, reaching out with its one still functioning arm and grabbing onto Corbin's shirt. The patron's eyes went wide as he was pulled in towards the bloodied, gaping maw of the ghoul. He let out a scream as its teeth sank into his shoulder, his thin shirt no match for the power of the zombie's jaw. "Corbin," Nora shouted. The waitress grabbed the ghoul by the back of the head, getting a fistful of hair before yanking it away from her friend. The creature gleefully chewed on the flesh as Corbin collapsed onto the ground. The zombie continued thrashing about as Nora did everything she could to hold it in place. However, she could feel its hair beginning to pull out from the root. "Hold him still," Rachel yelled. Nora did as instructed, continuing to grip the back of the creature's head tightly as Rachel charged at her with the bat. The customer brought the weapon back behind her head before swinging it downwards as hard as she could. The barrel landed directly on the top of the creature's head with enough force to crack the skull. While it wasn't a kill shot, it was enough to stagger the creature, which went partially limp. Nora let go so that the ghoul could fall to the ground, allowing Rachel to deliver another forceful blow to the back of its head. She continued swinging the bat, delivering strike after strike until the back of the creature's head was reduced to red mush. Once Rachel saw that the creature wasn't moving any longer, she continued holding the bat above her head, ready to strike at the first sign of movement. After several tense seconds, she relaxed, dropping the bat onto the ground. "Thanks, I owe you one," Nora said. "Counting the job offer, I think you owe me two," Rachel replied. Rachel and Nora paused for a moment before both of them let out a laugh, thankful for the much-needed tension break. It didn't take long before they were dragged back into the moment, however, as the banging on the front of the restaurant drew their attention. Both women looked over and saw that the two creatures that had pursued them had been joined by a couple of others. It took Nora a moment of staring before she let out a gasp, recognizing the creature on her left. "Oh my God," Nora whispered. "What is it?" Rachel asked. "The man on the left, that was the good tipping customer," Nora said. "Wait, what? You mean the one that just left?" Rachel asked. "Yeah, that's him," Nora confirmed. Are you sure? Kyle asked. The two women looked over to Kyle, who had a couple of napkins pressed up against his bloody nose. Before they could even ask, he held up his hand and gave them a nod that he was all right. Trust me, that's him, Nora insisted. Corbin let out a pained groan on the ground, drawing everyone's attention. He struggled to sit up against the wall of the front counter, letting out another painful grunt as his back smacked against it. Jesus, Corbin, let me get you a towel or something, Nora said, running around to the other side of the counter to grab a clean towel. As she came back down towards the others, she looked through the opening into the kitchen, spotting Andrew sitting on the floor. The cook's feet were planted firmly on the ground, his arms resting on top as he looked straight down. Nora let out a sigh as she tossed the towel onto the counter towards Kyle. Get some pressure on Corbin's wound. I'm going to be right back, she said. Where are you going? Kyle asked. To have a word with the cook, Nora replied. Her tone dripped with venom and contempt as she shoved open the swinging door to the kitchen. The dramatic entrance was highlighted by a loud thud as the door slammed against the back wall. Despite the fanfare, Andrew didn't look up. I know you and I don't have the greatest relationship, Andrew, but I would have sworn that if my life was in danger, you would have come out and helped instead of hiding in the kitchen, she said. It's not like that, Nora, Andrew replied. From my vantage point, it certainly does look like it's that way, she said. Andrew picked his head up, looking over at Nora, who gasped at the sight. Blood covered his face, still fresh and rolling down his cheek like crimson tears. Despite the gore on his face, he didn't react to it, ignoring its existence. My God, Andrew, what happened? Nora asked, her tone softening as she reached for a towel, extending it out for the cook while approaching. I know you can handle yourself, that's why I didn't follow you outside to begin with. But when I saw those people chasing you, I knew something bigger was happening. So I did what I thought was the most helpful thing in that moment, Andrew explained. Which was what? She asked. Shut the back door, he said, motioning his head towards the back of the kitchen. Nora gasped as her eyes fixated on a body laying on the ground with a knife stuck into the back of its head. Andrew wiped some of the blood from his face before raising up his right hand, revealing a nasty bite mark on the side of it. Jesus, Andrew, are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I'll live, unlike that prick over there. He came out of nowhere and took a chunk out of me, but I made him regret it, Andrew replied. Nora took a knee beside the cook, motioning for the towel. Once she grabbed onto it, she began wrapping it around Andrew's wound. Is the door secure? She asked. Yeah, nobody is getting through there, he assured her. Before they could continue, Kyle yelled out from the front of the restaurant. His voice carried a hint of relief in it. Hey guys, get in here. The police are pulling up. Chapter 3. Nora reached down to Andrew, helping him back to his feet as Kyle continued to yell from the front of the diner. Did you hear me? The police are pulling up, Kyle shouted. Yeah, I heard you. We're coming, Nora responded. Andrew added with a smirk, never thought I would be happy to know the police were at my doorstep. Nora chuckled as the two of them made their way to the front of the restaurant, the sound of a siren growing louder by the second. By the time the duo reached the others at the front, flashing lights poured through the front windows. The creatures just on the other side of the glass quickly lost interest in the people inside, turning back toward the approaching police car. In a flash, they sprinted toward the newly arrived prey. Oh no, 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 Rachel murmured, panic evident in her voice. The five of them watched helplessly as the police car came to a full stop at the far right of the parking lot. Both doors of the vehicle opened, and two officers stepped out, yelling for the zombies to stop. Two of the ghouls honed in on the passenger cop, slamming into him before the man could unholster his weapon. Despite the 15 yards and front windows separating them, the survivors inside the restaurant could hear his screams as the creatures tore into his flesh. The driver let out a frightened yell as he opened fire. He didn't have the opportunity to aim properly, firing wildly toward the approaching ghouls. A couple of shots landed center mass on the creatures, but did nothing to slow their assault. The officer managed to fire off one more shot before he was tackled to the ground, the bullet piercing through the top portion of a restaurant window. All 5 people looked up at the entry point, terrified as the spider-webbing cracks spread downward. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when the cracking stopped halfway down. Just to be safe, I think we should move down a bit. Those people outside seem to be drawn to movement, and I don't want them putting any pressure on that window, Nora advised. Andrew nodded. Hell, I'll do you one better. Let's get out of sight altogether. The kitchen? Rachel suggested. Y'all do what you want to do, but that's where I'm going to be, Andrew replied firmly. The others exchanged concerned glances before following Andrew into the kitchen. Kyle helped the injured Corbin through the door, and as they looked for a spot for him to sit, Rachel came through carrying a chair from the front. These things aren't the most comfortable, but they should be better than the floor, Rachel said. Thank you, Corbin whispered, his voice weak. He staggered, and Kyle struggled to keep him from falling. Help me, Kyle called out. Rachel reached up and grabbed Corbin's arm, barely preventing him from face-planting. The two of them maneuvered him just enough to get him seated. Nora stepped in front of her friend, grabbing him by the side of the head and holding him up so she could look into his eyes. Come on, Corbin, stay with me now, Nora pleaded. Corbin's voice continued to weaken as his hand fell away from the wound on his shoulder. The towel was completely soaked in crimson, landing on the concrete floor with a wet thud. Blood continued to pour from the wound unabated, worrying the waitress. Corbin. Nora cried out, her voice rising in panic. She began to freak out as Corbin continued bleeding out in front of her. Andrew stepped up, motioning for Rachel to take Nora and move her away from Corbin so he could tend to him. Come on, Nora, let's go over here. It's going to be okay, Rachel said soothingly. Nora struggled to hold it together but managed as Rachel guided her away. The cook grabbed onto Corbin's shirt to prevent him from falling over. He took a knee in front of the wounded man, lifting up his head to look into his eyes. Corbin, my man, I'm going to need you to look at me. Come on, man, open those eyes, Andrew urged. The other 3 watched as Andrew continued trying to coax Corbin out of his deathly slumber. After a solid minute, Andrew let out a deep sigh and gently lowered Corbin's head. I'm sorry, but he's gone, Andrew said solemnly. Nora let out a frustrated scream before breaking away from Rachel's grip. Rachel reached for her again, but Kyle gently placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. Andrew stood up, turning to the 2 customers while Nora took a moment to compose herself. I think it goes without saying that we need to get the hell out of here. I don't know what's going on, but I feel pretty confident in saying that I don't want to be anywhere near civilization when the sun comes up, Andrew declared. I find no fault in that logic, Rachel agreed. Yeah, what she said. But where are we going? Kyle asked. We can't be more than 10 minutes away from the outskirts of Lexington. If we can get to a car, we should be able to get out before rush hour, Rachel suggested. I'm with you, but my car is ancient. The key fob doesn't work, so you have to unlock it manually with the key. And I don't think that's happening. Not with those people out there, Kyle explained. The police car. We're taking the police car, Nora said firmly. Andrew's face lit up. Damn, girl, now we're talking. The doors were opened, so we should be able to dive in and... Andrew let out a startled scream mid-sentence as the reanimated corpse of Corbin reached out and grabbed his arm. The cook instinctively tried to pull away, only to find the deceased customer's grip too tight. In a flash, 2 fingers vanished inside Corbin's zombified mouth, the teeth biting down hard and degloving the fingers as Andrew yanked his hand free. The creature didn't stop there, darting from his chair toward Kyle as he chewed. The young man let out a frightened yell, darting to the side and shoving the ghoul into the flat-top cooking surface. Before the zombie could regain its footing, Rachel rushed forward, putting all her weight on the creature's back and driving it face first onto the hot metal. Flesh sizzled under the intense heat, doing little to dissuade the ghoul from thrashing about. This isn't working, Rachel shouted. Nora stood by the back door, watching the scene unfold. She glanced down, spotting the dead creature by her feet with a knife sticking out of the back of its head. Without hesitation, she reached down, yanked the blade free, and marched toward the cooking zombie with purpose. Spinning the weapon around, she drove the tip of the knife into the back of the creature's head. Corbin's corpse convulsed for several moments as Rachel let go. They watched as the unlife drained from the creature's body, held in place by the fusion of cooking flesh and the flat top. Seconds later, the dead weight won, peeling the creature's face away from the metal and collapsing to the ground in a heap. The 4 remaining survivors stared down at the fallen customer, everyone breathing heavily from the confrontation. The only sound in the kitchen was the sizzling coming from the flesh on the flat top. Nora remained calm and collected as she grabbed a spatula off the rack, scraped the flesh off, and tossed the utensil in the trash. "Andrew, are you okay?" she asked. The cook held up his hand, revealing the 2 degloved fingers, causing the others to recoil. "Do you have a med kit somewhere?" Rachel asked. "We do, but there ain't anything in there that's going to fix this," Andrew replied. He thought for a moment before spotting a cut-proof glove on the counter. Turning to Kyle, he spoke with authority. "Open that closet over there. At the bottom in a bag, there's a roll of duct tape. Get it and bring it to me." Kyle didn't argue, rushing to the closet and retrieving the tape. As he returned, he watched Andrew shove his hand into the glove, the wounded fingers wrapped in towel fragments. Andrew howled in pain as he secured the glove. He groaned as he pulled his injured fingers together, holding them in place and motioning to Kyle. "Tape them up tight, together." Kyle nodded, pulling off a large section of tape and wrapping it around. "Jesus Christ, man, is this going to work?" "I don't have a clue. I just know it's better than leaving them exposed," Andrew replied. Kyle continued wrapping the fingers until Andrew nodded for him to stop. The cook stared at his injured hand for a moment before looking at Corbin's body on the ground. A thought of his demise from the bite popped into his head, but he forced it out. He wasn't dead yet, so there was no use dwelling on it. "So the police car?" Andrew asked, looking over to Nora. The waitress saw the distress in his eyes and continued, giving him something to focus on. "Yeah, the police car. I didn't see them shut the engine off, so it should still be running, which means we can get in and go. It's not that far to the main road, then it's a straight shot out of town," Kyle added. "We're making a detour first," Nora said firmly. Kyle hesitated. "Nora, we're all leaving friends behind. We don't have time to save everybody. I have 2 teenagers at home, and we're not leaving them behind," Nora replied. She stared Kyle down until he backed off, nodding subtly. "Don't worry, though. It's not too far off the beaten path. We'll have plenty of time to grab them and still be out of town before the sun comes up," she assured them. "Now, the only question is, how are we getting to the police car? Because I really don't think going through the front door is an option," Rachel pointed out. "There's a pretty big area out back. As long as we open that door carefully, and none of those people are back there, we should be able to make it around the building without being noticed," Andrew suggested. "Man, that's a hell of a risk," Kyle muttered. "So is sitting here. Whatever is happening is too much for the police to handle, at least the police around here," Nora countered. "I'm with you. We definitely need to get out of here. I'm just not looking forward to making that run," Kyle admitted. "Trust me, man, none of us are," Andrew replied. "Okay, so unless someone has a better idea, that's the plan," Nora said. She looked around at the others, who nodded in agreement. "All right, it's settled. Grab whatever weapon you feel comfortable with. Andrew, pick me out a small knife to go along with my bat," Nora instructed. "Sure thing. But what are you going to do?" Andrew asked. "You can't have a road trip without some snacks, and I'm going to make sure we have enough to eat in case we can't hit a drive-thru today." Chapter 4. Kyle positioned himself by the back kitchen door, gripping a large butcher's knife tightly. He glanced back at the others who were lining up behind him. His girl Rachel patted him on the back for comfort, Nora stood just behind her, and Andrew brought up the rear. Despite the injury to his hand, the cook held a large meat cleaver firmly. Kyle could see the pain in his eyes, but Andrew was fighting through it. "Okay, here's the plan," Kyle said. "We're going to get out there as quietly as we can and get to the police car. If we have the time, Rachel, I want you and Andrew to go around the passenger side to get in. Nora and I will get in on the driver's side. Are you driving? Nora asked. Unless you have some objection to it. I'm good with it as long as you keep your word about going to get my kids, she replied. Don't worry, Rachel interjected. If he doesn't go, he'll have me to deal with. Then he's definitely not going to abandon them, Nora said with a faint smile. All right, are we ready? Kyle asked. The other 3 survivors gave their leader a slight nod. Nobody was really confident, but they were as ready as they were ever going to be. Let's do it then, Kyle said. Kyle turned to the door, staring at it for a moment, as if trying to psych himself up to open it. After what felt like an eternity, he reached out and unlatched the deadbolt as quietly as possible before grabbing the knob. You got this, man. You got this, he whispered to himself. Kyle kept that thought running through his head as he gently pulled open the door, relieved that the hinges didn't squeak. A lone streetlight on the corner of the building illuminated most of the back parking lot, which was devoid of life or unlife. He motioned with his head towards the outside, signaling the others to follow him out. They left the back door open, not wanting to risk shutting it and making a sound. The group walked cautiously along the back wall of the diner, ensuring each step was as quiet as it could be. Kyle raised his fist as he approached the corner of the building, signaling everyone to stop. The sounds of banging on the front window of the restaurant reached his ears, along with angry moans coming from the creatures. Kyle poked his head out from behind cover, immediately pulling it back when he spotted a lone creature on the side of the building no more than 5 yards away. The others in the group looked at him with concern, but with a reassuring nod, he kept them calm, even if he wasn't calm himself. Knowing they needed the lay of the land, he took a deep breath and poked his head out again. Relief washed over him as the nearby creature spotted something across the street and took off sprinting after it. Kyle looked in that direction, but the darkness revealed nothing. He didn't particularly care what it was, only that it provided them with an opening to get to the car. The police vehicle sat 15 yards away, the lights still flashing and the doors sitting wide open. There was just enough illumination coming off the streetlight to highlight the blood splatter on the side of the car, left by the officer who was no longer on the ground. Kyle motioned for the others to follow as he led them out from the back of the building. While his eyes were locked on the police car, the others focused on the darkness to their right. The sounds of the banging grew louder as they got closer to the front of the restaurant. Kyle remained focused on the vehicle, looking past it and seeing more movement on the street. The flashing lights on the roof of the car gave him glimpses of the half-dozen creatures rushing towards them. Realizing they had to move, Kyle spoke with urgency, but kept his voice low. We have to run. Run. Kyle took off sprinting, with Rachel close behind him. However, Nora and Andrew didn't hear him and continued looking out into the darkness. The young couple got a couple of steps away from the others before Nora realized they were running. Damn it, she cursed. Nora reached back and grabbed Andrew by the arm, pulling him along as she picked up the pace. The two of them pumped their legs hard, trying to keep pace with the younger duo, but losing a couple of steps. Nora and Andrew got within 5 yards of the edge of the diner as Kyle reached the driver's side of the police car. The young man dove inside, slamming the door shut, while his girl darted around the front end. Rachel barely made it to safety before the encroaching creatures from the street slammed into the side of the vehicle. Their arrival was matched by a handful of others who emerged from the front of the restaurant, effectively cutting off Nora and Andrew's path to safety. Nora stifled a scream as the situation settled in on her. She looked to Kyle, who had a shocked and apologetic expression on his face. The eye contact was short-lived, however, as a zombie emerged from the front of the building and spotted the duo still out in the open. We have to go. We have to go. Andrew shouted. Andrew grabbed onto Nora and yanked her back, pulling himself in front of her as the creature sprinted toward them. Nora was stunned for a brief second, watching as the wounded cook attacked the ghoul with his meat cleaver. He swung the makeshift weapon across his body, timing the attack just right and embedding the blade into the side of the creature's skull. The impact was violent, sending the ghoul lurching to the side and collapsing onto the ground, yanking the blade free from Andrew's injured hand. The noise drew the attention of several other zombies who turned and began pursuit. Their moans and footsteps filled the air as the duo turned and began running back toward the safety of the restaurant. Andrew reached out and grabbed the baseball bat from Nora's hand, ripping it free as she made the turn around the corner. He could hear the footsteps coming up behind him, knowing they were close. The cook reached the corner, planting his feet on the ground and spinning around with a forceful swing. His aim was off, however, the weapon striking the lead creature in the shoulder rather than the head. The impact sent the zombie into the wall, where it bounced off and continued rushing the cook. Andrew tried his best to avoid being grabbed, but the ghoul managed to wrap one arm around him, pulling them both to the ground. Andrew. Nora screamed. The cook let out an unintelligible scream as another ghoul jumped on top of him. Nora continued backing away slowly, the shock of watching Andrew being ripped to shreds too much for her to overcome quickly. She continued backpedaling another couple of steps until one of the creatures came around the corner and locked eyes onto her. The ghoul began pursuit, forcing her out of her stupor. Nora sprinted back to the open door, driven by the fear of the zombie right on her heels. She could feel it getting closer as she approached the entrance, pushing her to move faster. The waitress grabbed onto the door as she entered, pulling it closed behind her. She wasn't fast enough, however, the ghoul getting both arms inside as the edge of the door cracked its ribs. She leaned back as far as she could, pulling with every ounce of strength she could muster. The ghoul reached out its flailing arms, missing her shoulders by inches. The waitress continued to struggle, letting out a scream as if to summon untapped strength within her. It quickly dawned on her that she didn't have a way to shut the door, a point reinforced by the sounds of more footsteps coming from outside. "Damn it," she shouted. Nora looked behind her, scanning the room for any place to hide. While she didn't see anything, she realized the small manager's office just to the right outside the kitchen door was her only option. Nora planted her feet firmly on the ground, positioning herself to move quickly before letting go of the door. As soon as she released the knob, her feet propelled her through the kitchen. Much to her relief, it took the ghoul in the doorway a moment to free itself and begin its pursuit. Nora darted through the kitchen, crashing through the swinging door and making a hard right turn toward the office door, which was sitting open. She raced through the entrance, slamming the door shut behind her just before the creature reached her. She stepped back away from the glass, watching as the zombie slammed its hands against it. Blood smeared on the window, but no cracks formed. The waitress retreated into the small office, reaching into her jacket hanging on the wall and retrieving her cell phone before collapsing behind the desk. She opened it to the text app, clicking on Kevin and typing, "I love you both very much." She stared at her phone for a moment, waiting on the text to go through, only to be greeted with "the network is busy" message. Nora let out a frustrated scream as tears began to form in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Kevin. I'm sorry, Alana. I tried to get home to you." "I really did," she said, her voice trembling. Nora let out another frustrated scream, trying to hold it together as the banging on the office door continued unabated. She struggled to keep her hope alive, but with every bloodied smack on the window, a little more of that hope faded. Before the despair fully settled in, however, Kyle's voice boomed through the restaurant, boosted by the police car's loudspeaker. "Nora, are you still alive? Show yourself if you can." Nora jumped to her feet, looking around for anything to signal Kyle with. After a brief moment, she realized she had a flashlight on her phone. Quickly turning it on, she shined it out through the office door window, waving it around in the hopes that he could see it. "I see you, Nora. I see you. Now I need you to be ready to move because we won't have a lot of time," Kyle instructed. Nora stood there for a moment, confused. The front door of the diner was locked up tight, and those things were everywhere. So what in the world was he planning on doing? She didn't have to wait long for an answer as tires squealed from outside. She pressed her face up against the office door window, just able to see the front of the store as the back of the police car approached at an alarming speed. The rear of the vehicle crashed through the front end of the restaurant, sending tables and chairs flying in all directions. The car didn't stop until it slammed into the front counter, dislodging it and crushing the creature just outside the office. Nora didn't hesitate, immediately throwing open the door and darting out. She leapt over the counter, narrowly avoiding being grabbed by the downed creature. The waitress rushed over to the back door of the police car as the zombies outside the diner moved toward the newly created entrance. There was more than enough time for her to get to safety, slamming the door shut before the ghouls could reach her. I'm in, she shouted. Kyle threw the car back into drive, slamming on the gas. It took the tires a moment to gain traction, but once they did, the vehicle sped out of the restaurant. A couple of zombies bounced off the front end as it reached the parking lot. Hang on, Kyle yelled. Kyle cut the wheel hard to the left, causing the tires to squeal as the car avoided the other vehicles still in the parking lot. It took them a moment to reach the street and get straight, but soon they were on their way, leaving the zombies in the restaurant in their wake. Are you okay? Rachel asked. Yeah, I'm okay. But Andrew, Nora trailed off as Rachel gave her a comforting nod. Okay, Nora, you need to tell me where I'm going because it's time to go get your kids, Kyle said firmly. Nora nodded as she sat up in the seat, leaning forward to look out the front windshield. The sun poked up from behind the horizon, bathing the street in light and causing Kyle to slam on the brakes. Ahead at the next intersection sat 2 wrecked vehicles, with half a dozen zombies converging on it. The trio sat in silence for a moment as they watched the scene unfold before them. It's going to take a little longer to get there, but I know a back way to get to my house, Nora offered. I'm okay with it taking a little longer. What do you think, Rachel? Kyle asked. As long as it means avoiding stuff like that, I'm all for it, she replied. Okay, Nora, where am I going? The police car sat there for another moment before backing up and making a left turn onto a side street. The trio drove off towards their destination, hoping they could arrive in time. The end.